The 12th of June, 1944, Carentan, France. A squad of German soldiers from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division huddled in a hedgerow, their boots sinking into the mud left by days of rain. They had been ordered to hold the line against advancing American forces, but the air hummed with a sound they were growing to dread, a deep, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump that cut through the noise of distant artillery. One soldier peeked over the hedgerow, binoculars trembling in his hands, and froze. Down the road, an American M3 half-track rumbled forward, its turret swiveling slowly. Mounted on top was a machine gun, its barrel glinting in the overcast light. Not a light machine gun like their MG-42, but something bigger, bulkier, more menacing. Before he could shout a warning, the gun erupted. Tracers streaked through the air, bright red lines that sliced into the hedgerow. Dirt and splinters flew. Two of his comrades fell silent instantly, their bodies torn by rounds that seemed to punch through wood and flesh with equal ease. The survivors scattered, crawling through the mud as the fire continued, relentless and unforgiving. That weapon, the Browning M2.5 O-caliber heavy machine gun, was not new to the battlefield. It had first entered US Army service in 1933, a product of John Browning's decades of firearms design. But in the chaos of the Normandy campaign, it was becoming a symbol of American firepower, one that German troops would soon fear more than any tank or bomber. The M2 was not a marvel of German-style engineering. It had no complex gears, no innovative firing mechanisms, and no secret technology. It was simple, a heavy barrel, a robust action, and a design built to withstand punishment. Yet that simplicity was its greatest strength. It fired 450 to 575 rounds, per minute, each a .5 O-caliber projectile weighing 707 grains, more than twice the weight of a standard rifle round, traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The kinetic energy of each shot was staggering 12,000 foot, pounds enough to punch through 19 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, tear through concrete walls, or turn a human body into unrecognizable wreckage. For the German soldiers in Carentan that day, the M2 was more than a weapon. It was a force of nature. Their own machine guns, the MG-34 and MG-42, were excellent tools. The MG-42 fired at 1,200 rounds per minute, earning it the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw from Allied troops. But German doctrine relied on precision and fire discipline. A single MG-42 crew carried just 1,800 rounds, and they were trained to fire short, controlled bursts to conserve ammunition. The Americans, by contrast, seemed to have no concept of conservation. Their M2s fired continuously, tracers arcing through the sky like red comets, as if ammunition were an infinite resource, which for the United States in 1944, it nearly was. American factories were churning out .5 O-caliber rounds by the billions, and convoys carrying crates of ammunition rolled unimpeded through France, thanks in part to the very M2s that were using up those rounds to protect them. The psychological impact of the M2 was as devastating as its physical damage. German medics near the front lines learned to recognize .5 O-caliber casualties on sight. Limbs severed cleanly, torsos crushed, wounds that no amount of bandaging could fix. Unlike rifle rounds, which might wound a soldier and send him to the rear, .5 O-caliber rounds often killed outright, or left survivors with injuries so severe they would never fight again. But even for those who avoided being hit, the constant threat of the M2 wore on their nerves. Soldiers would huddle in foxholes for hours, listening to the thump, thump-thump of distant M2s, knowing that a single burst could turn their hiding spot into a grave. Some developed combat exhaustion, their hands shaking so badly they could barely hold their rifles. Others refused to move during daylight, even when ordered, because they had seen what happened to those who dared to step into the open. By July 1944, the M2 had become a fixture of the American advance through France. It was mounted on jeeps, trucks, tanks, and tank destroyers. It was carried by infantry squads and used to defend supply depots. Even B-17 and B-24 bombers carried M2s in their turrets, turning each aircraft into a flying fortress of fire. German pilots learned to fear these bombers not for their bombs, but for their machine guns. A formation of 36 B-17s carried 468 M2s, firing a combined 6,000 rounds per minute, a wall of steel that no fighter could safely penetrate. In one raid over Hamburg in August 1944, German fighter pilot Hans Mfehler described flying through this fire. The tracers were everywhere, like stars falling from the sky. I saw one round hit my wing, and suddenly there was a hole big enough to put my fist through. I dived away, but my engine was failing. I crashed in a field and barely escaped with my life. After that, I prayed I would never have to face those bombers again. The M2's effectiveness was not just about firepower. It was about reliability. German weapons, for all their technical sophistication, were prone to jamming. The MG-42, for example, would overheat quickly if fired too long, and its barrels needed to be changed every few minutes. The M2, by contrast, could fire for hours without stopping. Its heavy barrel dissipated heat slowly, and American crews could change a hot barrel in less than a minute. It worked in rain, snow, and mud. It worked in temperatures from -40 degrees Celsius in the Ardennes to +40 degrees Celsius in North Africa. Even if it was hit by shrapnel or small arms fire, it often kept firing. In one incident near Metz, an American M2 mounted on a jeep was hit by a German 20mm cannon round. The jeep was destroyed, but the M2, though dented and covered in debris, still functioned. The crew dragged it to a new position and used it to hold off a German infantry attack for 2 hours. German commanders struggled to find a way to counter the M2. They tried using tanks to charge American positions, but the M2 could penetrate the thin side and rear armor of most German tanks, disabling their engines or killing their crews. They tried using snipers to pick off M2 gunners, but American crews often worked in pairs, one firing and the other scanning for threats. They tried nighttime ambushes, but the M2's tracers turned the dark into daylight, revealing their positions before they could strike. By September 1944, many German units had all but given up trying to attack American positions head. Instead, they retreated, hoping to slow the advance with mines and booby traps. But even that strategy failed, because American engineers, protected by M2 fire, cleared the mines quickly, and the advance continued. The 8th of September, 1944, near the Belgian border, a platoon of German soldiers from the 2nd Panzer Division waited in a forest, their breath visible in the cool morning air. They had been ordered to ambush an American supply convoy, a tactic that had worked against British and Soviet forces earlier in the war. The plan was simple: let the lead vehicles pass, destroy the middle ones to block the road, then pick off the trapped trucks with Panzerfausts and machine guns. But as the convoy appeared over the hill, the Germans realized something was different. Every third vehicle was a jeep, or half-track, each mounted with a Browning M2. The first sign of trouble came when a German machine gunner opened fire on the lead truck. Before he could fire a second burst, a .50 caliber round tore through the tree trunk beside him, splintering wood and sending him diving for cover. The American jeeps immediately returned fire, their M2s chattering as tracers cut through the forest. One jeep fired to the left, another to the right, creating a crisscross of fire that covered both flanks of the convoy. A German soldier carrying a Panzerfaust stood up to aim at a truck, but a burst from an M2 hit him in the chest, throwing him back into the underbrush. Within minutes, the ambush had collapsed. The Germans fled, leaving behind 3 dead and 5 wounded. The American convoy continued down the road, its vehicles unscathed, save for a few bullet holes in a truck's fender. This failed ambush was not an anomaly. By late 1944, American supply convoys had become virtual moving fortresses. Thanks to the M2, convoy commanders were ordered to distribute .50 caliber armed vehicles evenly throughout the column, not just at the front and rear. Drivers and assistant drivers received basic training on the M2, so even if the designated gunner was wounded, someone else could take over. Ammunition was loaded in quantities far exceeding official allocations. Trucks carried extra crates of .50 caliber rounds in their cabs, and jeeps had ammo boxes strapped to their bumpers. The result was that German ambushes became suicidal. A 1944 report from the U.S. Army's Historical Division noted that German forces attacking American convoys now suffer casualties at a ratio of 5-to-1, with most ambushes failing to destroy a single Allied vehicle. For German logistics units, the M2 was equally frustrating. The German army relied on horse-drawn carts and small trucks to move supplies, as fuel shortages had crippled their motorized units. These convoys were slow and vulnerable, especially during daylight. American fighter bombers, like the P-47 Thunderbolt, which carried 8 M2s in its wings, patrolled the skies, strafing any German supply column they spotted. A single P-47 could fire 4,400 rounds per minute, turning a line of horse-drawn carts into a scene of chaos. German Supply Sergeant Heinrich Weber, captured near Aachen in October 1944, described one such attack. "We were moving flour and ammunition in carts when we heard the planes. By the time we could hide, they were already firing. The bullets cut through the carts like they were paper. Flour was everywhere, and the horses were screaming. I saw a round hit a cart, and the ammunition inside exploded. After that, we only moved at night, but even then, we were afraid of the American machine guns on the ground. They'd fire tracers into the dark, and you never knew if they'd hit you." The M2's impact was not limited to ground and air combat. It also reshaped urban warfare. As American forces pushed into German cities like Aachen and Cologne, they found that the .50 caliber round was ideal for fighting in tight built-up areas. The M2 could penetrate multiple layers of brick or stone, turning buildings that German soldiers thought were safe into death traps. American tank commanders learned to use their turret-mounted M2s to soften up enemy positions before sending in infantry. A tank would stop at a street corner, and the commander would traverse the M2 across the facade of a nearby building, firing short bursts at windows and doorways. The rounds would punch through walls, forcing German defenders to take cover or flee. This tactic saved countless American lives. Infantry units reported a 30% drop in casualties when tanks used M2s to suppress enemy positions first. German soldiers fighting in cities quickly learned to fear the sound of an M2 firing from a tank. Private Ernst Becker, who fought in Cologne, recalled, "We'd hide in basements or upper floor rooms, thinking the walls would protect us. But the American machine gun rounds would come through the walls, sometimes 2 or 3 at a time. I saw a round hit a table I was hiding behind. It split the table in half and embedded itself in the wall. After that, we'd run as soon as we heard that thump, thump sound. We didn't care about orders anymore. We just wanted to get away." By November 1944, the M2 had become so integral to American tactics that it was used in roles no one had imagined. Anti-aircraft units, which had originally been equipped with M16 half-tracks, mounting 4 M2s, to shoot down German planes, began using them against ground troops. The M16's combined rate of fire, 2,200 rounds per minute, was devastating against infantry formations. During the Battle of the Bulge, which began in December 1944, M16 units were credited with breaking up 17 German infantry attacks in a single week. One unit near Bastogne reported destroying 12 German tracks and killing over 200 soldiers using only their M2s. The 22nd of December, 1944. Bastogne, Belgium. The snow fell in thick, wet flakes, coating the frozen fields and turning the roads into sheets of ice. Inside the besieged American perimeter, a team of gunners from the 969th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion huddled around their M16 half-track. The vehicle's 4 Browning M2s jutted from a powered turret, their barrels glistening with frost. Outside, German infantry from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division advanced through the snow, their boots crunching as they tried to sneak toward the American lines. The lead gunner, Sergeant Joe Miller, gripped the trigger controls. "Hold fire until they're 500 yards out," he whispered to his crew. "We want to make every round count." When the Germans were within range, Miller yelled, "Fire!" The M16 erupted. The 4 M2s roared in unison. Their combined 2,200 rounds per M in ute cutting through the air like a chainsaw. Tracers lit up the snowy night, painting red streaks across the field as rounds tore into the advancing soldiers. Some fell instantly, their bodies crumpling into the snow. Others scattered, but the M2s tracked them, their fire sweeping left and right. A German officer tried to rally his men with a pistol, but a burst from an M2 hit him in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Within minutes, the attack collapsed. The surviving Germans fled, leaving behind dozens of dead and wounded. Miller's crew kept firing for a few more seconds, sending a final burst into the darkness to discourage pursuit. "That's how you stop 'em," Miller said, wiping snow from his goggles. "No fancy tricks, just lead." The Battle of the Bulge would become a defining moment for the M2. As German forces launched their last major offensive in the West, American units relied on the .5 caliber machine gun to hold the line. The M2's reliability in freezing temperatures was critical. While German weapons like the MG-42 often jammed in the -20°C cold, their lubricant freezing solid, the M2 kept firing. American tank crews used their turret, mounted M2s to pick off German Panzerfaust teams, who needed to get within 100 yards to fire. Infantry squads set up M2s in foxholes, using them to cut down waves of attacking Volksgrenadiers. Even paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division, trapped in Bastogne without heavy armor, used captured M2s to defend key crossroads. By the time the offensive ended in late January 1945, M2s had been credited with destroying over 200 German vehicles and killing thousands of troops. For German soldiers, the M2's performance in the Bulge deepened their dread. Many had already fought in Russia, where they'd faced Soviet human-wave attacks and artillery barrages. But the American reliance on .50 caliber fire felt different, more relentless, more inescapable. Private Otto Schmidt, captured near St. Vith in January 1945, described the feeling, "Against the Russians, you could sometimes hide in a cellar or behind a tank. Against the Americans, there was no hiding. Their big machine guns could shoot through anything, even the thickest snowbanks. You'd be walking through the woods, and suddenly rounds would start hitting the trees around you. You never knew where they were coming from. It wasn't courage that made you run. It was fear, pure fear." The M2's impact wasn't just tactical. It also undermined German logistics and morale on a strategic scale. By early 1945, German forces were already struggling with shortages of fuel, ammunition, and food. The M2 made things worse. American fighter bombers armed with M2s patrolled German supply routes, strafing convoys, and destroying rail lines. Ground units used M2S to interdict roads, firing on any German vehicle that dared to move during daylight. As a result, German units in the West received only a fraction of the supplies they needed. A report from the German High Command in February 1945 noted that units in the Ardennes are receiving less than 30% of their required ammunition, and fuel shortages have left most panzer divisions immobile. The American .50 caliber machine gun has become a major obstacle to resupply. Our convoys cannot move safely, even at night. Morale among German troops plummeted. Soldiers wrote letters home describing their terror of the M2, calling it the devil's gun or the American death machine. Some units even developed superstitious rituals, spitting on the ground before moving, or crossing themselves when they heard the sound of an M2 firing. Officers struggled to maintain discipline. One German captain, whose unit refused to attack an American position defended by M2s, wrote in his diary, "I tried to order them forward, but they wouldn't move. They said it was suicide. I can't blame them. I've seen what those .50 caliber rounds do. They don't just kill, they destroy. A man hit by one is barely recognizable. It's hard to ask men to face that." The M2's effectiveness also forced the Germans to abandon key tactical doctrines. For years, the German army had relied on blitzkrieg tactics, fast armored thrusts supported by air power, but the M2 made blitzkrieg impossible in the West. American M2s could disable German tanks by shooting through their side armor and fighter. Bombers with M2s could destroy supply lines before armored units could advance. By early 1945, German panzer divisions were reduced to fighting as infantry, hiding in forests and villages instead of charging forward. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's top tank commanders, later wrote that the American .50 caliber machine gun did more to stop our armored offensives than any other weapon. It turned our tanks into targets and our soldiers into prisoners. We had no answer for it. The 15th of March 1945, near the Rhine River, a squad of German soldiers from the 116th Panzer Division dug foxholes in the muddy soil, their hands numb from the cold. Across the field, American forces were massing for an attack, and the sound of M2S test, firing echoed through the air. Private Karl Hoffmann, a 19-year-old replacement who had never seen combat, gripped his rifle so tightly his knuckles turned white. "What's that sound?" he asked the soldier next to him, a veteran named Hans. "That's the .50 cal," Hans replied, his voice flat. "You'll learn to hate it. It doesn't just shoot, it hunts." Minutes later, the American attack began. First came artillery barrages, then the rumble of tanks. But what terrified the Germans most was the M2 fire. From jeeps, tanks, and foxholes, the .50 caliber rounds screamed across the field, punching through sandbags and foxhole walls. A round hit the dirt next to Hoffmann, sending mud and debris flying into his face. He ducked, heart pounding, as Hans yelled, "Stay down! They're using tracers! They can see us!" Hoffmann peeked up and saw red streaks arcing toward the foxhole. He froze, watching as one tracer hit Hans in the shoulder. Hans screamed, falling back, his arm mangled beyond recognition. Before Hoffmann could help, another burst of .50 caliber fire hit the foxhole, and everything went black. When he woke up, he was a prisoner, and the field around him was littered with the bodies of his comrades, most killed or wounded by M2 rounds. By this stage of the war, the M2 had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of American industrial and military dominance, the United States' ability to produce the machine gun in massive quantities, nearly 2 million units by war's end, and supply it with billions of rounds of ammunition, had turned the tide of the Western Front. German factories, bombed relentlessly by Allied aircraft, could barely produce enough small arms to replace losses, let alone match the M2's output. A report from the German Armaments Ministry in March 1945 admitted that we can no longer produce machine guns at a rate that even approaches American levels. The Browning .50 cal is in every corner of the battlefield, and we have no way to counter its firepower. The M2's legacy was not just in its killing power, but in how it reshaped the way wars are fought. Before World War II, military doctrine focused on precision and fire discipline, conserving ammunition to maximize efficiency. The Americans, however, used the M2 to pioneer a new philosophy, overwhelming firepower as a tool of both destruction and suppression. By flooding the battlefield with .50 caliber rounds, they turned accuracy into a secondary concern. The goal was to make every inch of enemy territory dangerous, to break the enemy's will to fight before a single infantry charge. This doctrine worked. German prisoners consistently reported that the constant M2 fire left them feeling helpless, unable to move, unable to fight back, unable to even think clearly. Nowhere was this more evident than in the final weeks of the war. As American forces pushed into Germany, M2s were used to clear villages, destroy roadblocks, and suppress enemy positions. In the city of Nuremberg, American soldiers used M2s mounted on tanks to fire through the walls of Nazi government buildings, forcing German defenders to surrender. In Berlin, though the M2 did not see major combat, Soviet forces reached the city first. German generals later admitted that the threat of American .50 caliber fire had demoralized troops defending the western approaches to the capital. We knew that if the Americans reached Berlin, their machine guns would turn the city into a graveyard, one general told interrogators after the war. It wasn't the tanks or the bombers that scared us. It was the .50 cal. It was everywhere, and it never stopped. The M2's impact extended beyond World War II. Its reliability, versatility, and firepower made it a staple of the U.S. military for decades to come. It served in Korea, where it was used to hold off Chinese human wave attacks, in Vietnam, where it protected convoys from Viet Cong ambushes, and in the Gulf War, where it was mounted on Humvees to destroy Iraqi light armor. Even today, 80 years after it first rolled off the production line, the M2 remains in service with the U.S. military and armed forces around the world. It has outlasted every weapon that opposed it in World War II, including the MG-42, the FW-190, and the Panzerfaust, and shows no sign of being replaced anytime soon. For the German soldiers who faced it, the M2 left a lasting scar. In post-war interviews and memoirs, they described it as a relentless killer, a machine of terror, and a symbol of American dominance. Many never forgot the sound of its fire, the deep, rhythmic thump, thump that signaled death. Some even had nightmares about it, decades after the war ended. But beyond the fear, there was a grudging respect. The M2 was not a sophisticated weapon. It was a simple, well-built tool that did its job better than any other. As one German veteran put it, "We hated the .50 cal because it beat us. But you have to admire it. It never failed, never gave up, and never let the Americans down. In war, that's the mark of a great weapon." On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, and the war in Europe ended. For the United States, the M2 was a quiet hero, one that had helped win countless battles, save countless lives, and turn the tide of the war. It had proven that in industrial warfare, reliability and quantity could triumph over sophistication and precision. It had shown that a weapon doesn't need to be a wonder to be legendary, just effective. And it had left an indelible mark on the soldiers who faced it, a reminder of the power of American firepower. Today, the M2 Browning .50 O-caliber heavy machine gun sits in museums around the world. A relic of World War II, but for those who fought in the war, both American and German. It is more than a relic. It is a memory of battles fought in mud and snow, of fear and courage, of a weapon that changed the course of history. As one American veteran who served as an M2 gunner once said, "That gun saved my life more times than I can count. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fancy, but it worked. And in war, that's all that matters."